The date was September 3rd, 2005, marking the first day of high school for childhood friends Marcus, Brandon, and Jessica. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Riverside High School as the two boys arrived first, their conversation punctuated by nervous laughter and the occasional glance toward the imposing brick facade of their new academic home. Marcus adjusted his backpack straps for the third time, a habit that revealed his underlying anxiety despite his attempts to appear confident. Brandon, taller and more athletic than his friend, bounded up the concrete steps two at a time, his enthusiasm infectious as he turned back to encourage Marcus to hurry. The school's windows reflected the early morning light like dozens of watchful eyes, and the American flag snapped crisply in the autumn breeze above the main entrance. Students streamed past them in clusters, some reuniting with friends after the summer break, others looking as lost and overwhelmed as Marcus felt. Jessica appeared minutes later, her backpack slung over her shoulder with practiced ease, her dark hair catching the sunlight as she navigated through the crowd of students. She had spent the summer working at her aunt's boutique, and the experience had given her a newfound confidence that was immediately apparent to both boys. Her smile was warm and familiar, yet somehow different, as if the 3 months apart had allowed her to discover something new about herself. The trio stood together near the entrance, watching as upperclassmen strutted through the hallways with the casual arrogance that came with knowing exactly where they belonged. Freshmen huddled in nervous groups, clutching their schedules and locker combinations like lifelines, while sophomore and junior students moved with slightly more confidence, but still deferred to the seniors who ruled the social hierarchy with unquestioned authority. With their futures stretching ahead like an uncharted map, Brandon announced his intention to try out for the football team, his voice carrying the determination of someone who had spent the entire summer preparing for this moment. He had been running drills in his backyard, throwing passes to imaginary receivers and watching game footage until his eyes burned. Football wasn't just a sport to Brandon. It was his ticket to popularity, respect, and possibly even a college scholarship. He convinced Jessica to audition for the cheerleading squad, appealing to her natural grace and the dance lessons she had taken throughout middle school. Jessica had always been athletic, but cheerleading represented something more than physical ability. It was a chance to be part of something larger than herself, to stand on the sidelines and feel the energy of hundreds of students cheering in unison. Marcus listened to these grand plans with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He had no clear vision of what high school would bring him, no specific talent or passion that pointed toward an obvious path. While his friends discussed their ambitions with increasing excitement, he found himself wondering where he would fit in this new ecosystem of cliques, hierarchies, and unspoken rules. All three friends headed to their morning classes, agreeing to reconvene on the athletic field for tryouts. The hallways were a maze of lockers, bulletin boards covered in colorful announcements, and classroom doors that opened and closed with the rhythm of a well-orchestrated symphony. Marcus's first period was advanced biology, where he found himself seated next to a pale, thin boy with wire-rimmed glasses who was already taking notes despite the fact that the teacher hadn't started speaking yet. The boy introduced himself as Nathan, and Marcus immediately recognized him as the infamous child prodigy who had skipped 2 grades and was rumored to have an IQ higher than most college professors. Nathan's reputation preceded him like a warning label, and Marcus wondered what strange twist of fate had placed them in the same classroom. Meanwhile, Jessica discovered that her morning classes were filled with potential cheerleaders, each one sizing up the competition with carefully concealed glances and forced smiles. The social dynamics were already beginning to form, with certain girls naturally gravitating toward leadership positions, while others seemed content to follow. Jessica found herself somewhere in the middle, confident enough to speak up when necessary, but wise enough to observe and learn before making any bold moves. Brandon's morning was spent in classes filled with aspiring athletes, young men who had spent their summers building muscle and perfecting their techniques in preparation for tryouts. The competition was fierce, and Brandon could feel the weight of their expectations and his own ambitions pressing down on him like a physical force. Every casual conversation contained subtle challenges and assessments, as if they were all animals establishing dominance in a new territory. When Marcus arrived at the field for the afternoon tryouts, the autumn air was crisp and filled with the sounds of cleats on grass, coaches shouting instructions, and the distant thud of footballs hitting receivers' hands. He pulled aside a group of players who were taking a water break and had them cracking up with his quick wit, regaling them with perfectly timed observations about their coaches, their teammates, and the absurdity of some of the drills they were being forced to perform. His humor was sharp but never cruel, and he had an uncanny ability to find the ridiculous aspects of any situation and present them in a way that made everyone laugh. The players appreciated his commentary, and for a few moments, Marcus felt like he might actually find his place in this new environment. Perhaps he could be the funny guy, the one who provided comic relief and kept everyone's spirits up during the tough moments. Meanwhile, Brandon struggled terribly with his football skills, his summer of preparation seeming to evaporate under the pressure of actual performance. The ball felt foreign in his hands, his throws wobbled through the air like wounded birds, and his timing was off by fractions of seconds that might as well have been hours. Unable to throw a ball accurately despite months of practice, he watched as other hopefuls demonstrated the natural athleticism that he had somehow convinced himself he possessed. After failing multiple passes, each one more embarrassing than the last, his coach pulled him aside with the kind of gentle but firm tone that coaches reserved for hopeless cases. The older man's weathered face showed a mixture of sympathy and pragmatic assessment, as he advised Brandon to take a breather, to step back from the drills and watch for a while before deciding whether to continue. The suggestion hit Brandon like a physical blow, shattering the confidence he had spent months building. He walked to the sidelines with his head down, acutely aware that his dreams of football glory were crumbling before they had even begun. The other players continued their drills around him, their success highlighting his failure with cruel efficiency. From across the field, Jessica shot Brandon an encouraging smile, her cheerleading tryouts having gone well enough that she could afford to worry about her friend's struggles. She had successfully completed several routines, her dance background serving her well as she moved through the choreographed sequences with grace and precision. The coaches had nodded approvingly, and several veteran cheerleaders had offered words of encouragement that suggested she had a real chance of making the squad. Marcus approached Brandon to offer moral support, leaving behind the group of players who had been enjoying his commentary. He could see the disappointment etched on his friend's face and searched for words that might provide some comfort without seeming patronizing or false. The three friends had always supported each other through difficult moments, and Marcus wasn't about to abandon that tradition now. They were talking in low voices, Brandon's frustration evident in his clenched fists and tight jaw when they noticed something extraordinary happening on the far side of the field. A young student was driving what appeared to be a rocket-powered car of his own creation, but something had clearly gone wrong with his experiment. The vehicle was accelerating beyond his control, weaving erratically across the grass as its pilot struggled desperately with the steering mechanism. It was Nathan, the child prodigy from Marcus's biology class, and his latest invention was proving to be more dangerous than innovative. The rocket car was a bizarre contraption that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and held together with determination and duct tape. Flames shot from the rear engine in irregular bursts, propelling the vehicle forward in unpredictable spurts that sent it careening first left, then right, then straight ahead with no apparent pattern. Nathan's face was a mask of terror as he realized that his calculations had been catastrophically wrong. He had spent weeks designing and building the rocket car, convinced that his theoretical knowledge could overcome any practical limitations. Now, as the vehicle bucked and swerved beneath him like a mechanical bronco, he understood that there was a vast difference between equations on paper and the chaotic reality of physics in action. He slammed into everything stationary on that field, screaming as he careened forward without any semblance of control. The first collision was with a water cooler, sending plastic bottles flying in all directions and soaking several surprised players. The second impact demolished a pile of practice equipment, scattering cones and tackling dummies across the grass like oversized confetti. Cheerleaders and players dove out of his way as the makeshift rocket car zigzagged across the grass, its path impossible to predict or avoid. The coaches shouted conflicting instructions, some telling everyone to stay back, while others urged people to try to stop the runaway vehicle. The chaos was complete, with students running in every direction while Nathan's terrified screams provided a soundtrack to the pandemonium. The situation seemed hopeless, the rocket car gaining speed with each erratic burst from its homemade engine, when Brandon spotted a football lying forgotten on the grass. Without thinking, he grabbed the ball and drew back his arm, his months of failed practice suddenly crystallizing into perfect form. The throw was flawless, a tight spiral that cut through the air with deadly accuracy and knocked Nathan clean out of the speeding vehicle. The impact sent Nathan tumbling across the grass, while the unmanned rocket car continued its destructive path for several more yards before finally running out of fuel and coasting to a stop. The sudden silence that followed was almost as shocking as the chaos that had preceded it, broken only by the sound of Nathan groaning as he slowly picked himself up from the ground. This heroic act earned Brandon immediate respect from his coach and teammates, who gathered around him with expressions of amazement and newfound admiration. The same throwing arm that had failed him so miserably during drills had just executed the perfect pass under pressure, saving a fellow student from serious injury. The coach clapped him on the shoulder and invited him back to try again, suggesting that perhaps Brandon's problem wasn't ability, but simply nerves. However, several upperclassmen jocks had hurried to Nathan's side, not to help the dazed genius recover from his ordeal, but to take advantage of his vulnerable state. These seniors had been watching the chaos with amusement rather than concern, and they saw Nathan's accident as an opportunity for entertainment rather than a reason for assistance. They surrounded the small, disoriented boy and began tossing him around like a rag doll, their laughter cruel and predatory. Nathan was still recovering from his collision with the ground and couldn't defend himself against the larger, stronger students who seemed to view his misfortune as a source of amusement. His protests were weak and ineffective, only encouraging the bullies to continue their torment. Marcus, witnessing this cruelty from across the field, felt his stomach turn with disgust and anger. The same instinct that had driven him to comfort Brandon now compelled him to help poor Nathan, even though he barely knew the younger boy. He pushed through the crowd of onlookers, most of whom seemed content to watch the harassment without intervening. Unfortunately, Marcus's attempt at heroism backfired spectacularly. The upperclassmen were not about to let some nobody freshman interfere with their fun, and they quickly turned their attention to this new target. Marcus found himself grabbed by multiple hands and tossed around just as roughly as Nathan, his protests drowned out by the bullies' laughter and the crowd's continued cheering. Both boys were then subjected to the ultimate humiliation. They were forced into cheerleader outfits that the upperclassmen had somehow procured, complete with short skirts, pom-poms, and makeup applied with malicious glee. The cheerleaders themselves watched in horror, some protesting weakly, while others seemed too shocked to react at all. The final indignity came when Marcus and Nathan were hung from the horns of the school mascot, a bronze eagle statue that dominated the center of the athletic field. Bright pink lipstick had been smeared across their lips, and their cheerleader outfits made them look ridiculous as they dangled helplessly from the metal bird's outstretched wings. There, suspended above the crowd like bizarre ornaments, they became acquainted in the most humiliating way possible. Nathan's scientific mind immediately began analyzing their predicament, calculating angles and leverage points that might allow them to escape, while Marcus focused on the social implications of their shared embarrassment. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, they formed an unlikely friendship that would prove to be one of the most significant relationships of their lives. This humiliating day would forever be remembered as the day of the incident, a watershed moment that divided their high school experience into before and after. The image of two boys in cheerleader outfits hanging from a bronze eagle became an instant legend, referenced in yearbooks and whispered about in hallways for years to come. Fast forward 3 years, and the social dynamics of Riverside High School had shifted dramatically, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves beneath the surface of teenage society. Nathan and Marcus remained close friends, their bond forged in shared humiliation and strengthened by countless hours spent together in the margins of high school life. They had become the school's unofficial outcasts, but they wore that label with a strange kind of pride, finding comfort in their mutual rejection of the social hierarchies that governed their peers. Brandon and Jessica, however, had evolved into something completely different. The football throw that saved Nathan had indeed launched Brandon's athletic career, and he had parlayed that moment of heroism into a starting position on the varsity team. Success on the field had translated into social currency, and he now moved through the hallways with the confident swagger of the truly popular. Jessica's cheerleading career had followed a similar trajectory. Her natural grace and determination had quickly elevated her to captain of the squad, and she wore the title like a crown that granted her access to the highest echelons of teenage society. She had become one of those students who seemed to glide through high school effortlessly, accumulating achievements and admirers with equal ease. The distance between the former friends had grown gradually, so slowly that none of them had noticed it happening until it was too late to bridge. Brandon and Jessica had become so popular that they barely acknowledged Marcus anymore, offering only distant waves from across crowded hallways when their paths occasionally crossed. These gestures were polite but empty, acknowledgements of a shared past that no longer seemed relevant to their present circumstances. That morning, as Nathan and Marcus walked to class through hallways that buzzed with the familiar energy of teenage drama, the younger genius came across Tyler, a pseudo-delinquent who had pulled up on a powerful motorcycle that gleamed chrome and black in the morning sunlight. The bike was clearly expensive and probably beyond what most students could afford, suggesting that Tyler's rebellious image was more style than substance. Tyler cut an impressive figure as he dismounted from his motorcycle, his leather jacket and deliberately tousled hair creating the perfect image of teenage rebellion. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he looked good and didn't care what anyone thought about it. Several students stopped to admire the bike, while others whispered among themselves about who this mysterious newcomer might be. Nathan, ever the rule follower, felt obligated to inform Tyler that motorcycles weren't allowed on school grounds, according to the student handbook that he had memorized over the summer. His approach was polite but firm, the kind of intervention that teachers and administrators probably hoped more students would make. Nathan had always believed that rules existed for good reasons and that ignoring them led to chaos and disorder. Marcus quickly silenced his friend with a sharp elbow to the ribs and a warning glance that conveyed volumes about the social suicide Nathan was about to commit. Marcus had learned through painful experience that enforcing school rules was a quick way to make enemies, and he had no desire to see his friend targeted by someone who clearly didn't respect authority in any form. Tyler, for his part, seemed amused rather than annoyed by Nathan's warning. He studied the small, earnest boy with interest, as if Nathan were some exotic species that he had never encountered before. After a moment, he simply smiled and suggested that Nathan might want to mind his own business, delivering the advice in a tone that was friendly enough to avoid being threatening, but firm enough to make his point clear. During lunch, Marcus found himself in his usual position at the outcasts' table, watching Brandon and Jessica's relationship from afar, with the painful intensity of someone observing a life he could never have. The cafeteria was a microcosm of the school's social structure, with each table representing a different level of the teenage hierarchy. The popular kids commanded the center tables, their laughter louder and their conversations more animated than anyone else's. Marcus was painfully aware of his secret crush on Jessica, a feeling that had grown stronger rather than weaker over the 3 years since they had drifted apart. He watched her animated conversations with Brandon and felt a familiar ache in his chest, knowing that she was further away from him now than she had ever been. She had grown more beautiful over the years, but it was more than physical attractiveness that drew him to her. She represented everything he had lost when their friendship ended, everything he might have been if he had made different choices. He practically zoned out staring at her, his lunch growing cold as he lost himself in memories of their childhood friendship and fantasies about what might have been. Her laugh carried across the cafeteria like music, and Marcus found himself straining to hear every word of her conversations, searching for some sign that she might still remember their shared past with the same fondness that he did. He only snapped back to reality when he realized he was just another lame senior sitting at the outcasts' table with Chester and Eugene, two students who had been relegated to the social margins for reasons that were both obvious and cruel. Chester was painfully shy, his stutter making him an easy target for bullies who seemed to enjoy his discomfort. Eugene was simply different, his interests and mannerisms setting him apart from his peers in ways that made him vulnerable to ridicule. Marcus had been ostracized since the mascot incident, relegated to the social periphery where he had learned to find comfort in the company of other misfits and forgotten students. The outcasts were a diverse group, united only by their shared status as people who didn't quite fit anywhere else. They had their own internal dynamics and hierarchies, but these were gentler and more forgiving than the brutal social structures that governed the popular kids. The outcasts were discussing the latest rumors about budget cuts affecting their favorite elective classes when Jeanette, a peculiar girl with an obvious infatuation with Nathan, stopped by their table. She was the daughter of wealthy parents who owned several businesses in town, and her expensive clothes and accessories stood out like beacons in the cafeteria's sea of budget fashion and hand-me-downs. Jeanette's crush on Nathan was one of the school's worst-kept secrets, visible to everyone except possibly Nathan himself. She followed him around like a devoted puppy, offering to help with his projects and finding excuses to spend time near him whenever possible. Her behavior was so obvious that it made other students uncomfortable, but Nathan seemed genuinely oblivious to her romantic intentions. For reasons that remained mysterious to everyone who observed their interactions, Nathan didn't reciprocate Jeanette's feelings despite her obvious devotion and the potential social benefits that a relationship with her might bring. Perhaps he was too focused on his scientific pursuits to notice romance, or maybe he simply wasn't interested in anyone who made their feelings so transparently obvious. Later that day, Marcus caught a glimpse of Jessica by the vending machine and approached her with the nervous energy of someone attempting something that might end badly. The vending machine area was neutral territory, one of the few places in the school where different social groups might interact without it seeming forced or artificial. They caught up during the few minutes before the bell rang, their conversation touching on safe topics like classes, teachers, and shared memories from their childhood. Jessica was warm and friendly, but there was a distance in her manner that reminded Marcus of how much had changed between them. She asked about his plans for college and seemed genuinely interested in his answers, but her attention kept drifting to other students who passed by. They discussed old times with the careful politeness of former friends who were trying to pretend that their current relationship was a natural evolution rather than a painful decline. Marcus wanted to ask her about Brandon, about whether she was happy, about whether she ever missed their old friendship, but the words stuck in his throat like physical objects too large to swallow. When Brandon appeared at her side with the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was, Jessica quickly returned to his orbit with an apologetic smile for Marcus. The transition was smooth and polite, but it left Marcus feeling like he had been dismissed from a conversation that had never really included him in the first place. In physics class that afternoon, Marcus's teacher droned on about Nikola Tesla's contributions to electrical engineering, his monotone voice turning fascinating scientific discoveries into mind-numbing recitations of facts and dates. The classroom was stuffy and overheated, and most students were fighting to stay awake as the teacher continued his lecture without any apparent awareness of his audience's glazed expressions. Nathan burst through the classroom door with the dramatic flair of someone delivering urgent news, his usually neat appearance disheveled and his breathing slightly labored, as if he had been running. He fabricated an elaborate story about an AV club emergency that required Marcus's immediate assistance, his explanation filled with technical jargon that the physics teacher pretended to understand. Marcus was grateful for any excuse to escape the tedious lecture, and he gathered his books with the enthusiasm of a prisoner being offered parole. Nathan's rescue attempt was so transparent that several classmates rolled their eyes, but the teacher seemed too tired to question the obvious fabrication. As they approached the AV room, Nathan's excitement became increasingly apparent. He walked with quick, nervous steps and kept glancing around as if he were afraid of being overheard. His behavior suggested that whatever he wanted to show Marcus was both significant and secret, the kind of discovery that could change everything if it worked, or destroy his reputation if it failed. Nathan hinted at a significant project he'd been working on for months, explaining in carefully vague terms that he had managed to utilize the quantum accelerator technology from the rocket propulsion engine that had caused such chaos on the day of the incident. His scientific vocabulary was impressive, but largely incomprehensible to Marcus, who had learned to nod at appropriate intervals when Nathan launched into his technical explanations. The moment they entered the AV room, Marcus was surprised to see other club members salute Nathan with obvious respect and deference. The AV club had apparently elevated Nathan to something approaching deity status, treating his every word as gospel and his projects as works of genius. Marcus couldn't have cared less about the social dynamics of the audiovisual equipment enthusiasts, but he was intrigued by the obvious importance that Nathan's peers placed on whatever he had been working on. Eventually, Nathan revealed his masterpiece, a simulated representation of practical time travel, complete with complex equations that covered every available whiteboard in the room. The diagrams looked like something from a graduate-level physics textbook, filled with symbols and calculations that suggested Nathan had been working far beyond his grade level. The simulation showed theoretical models of temporal displacement, with colorful graphics that demonstrated how his machine might theoretically allow someone to move backward or forward through time. Nathan had clearly spent countless hours perfecting the presentation, and his excitement was infectious, even though Marcus had serious doubts about the feasibility of the entire concept. Marcus refused to believe such a thing was possible, his skepticism rooted in a lifetime of disappointments and a practical understanding that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Time travel belonged in science fiction movies and comic books, not in the AV room of a suburban high school. Nathan's enthusiasm was admirable, But Marcus had learned to be cautious about dreams that seemed to offer easy solutions to life's problems. Nathan continued pestering Marcus about the project during their shared PE class, where both boys were equally incompetent at the athletic activities that their classmates seemed to master effortlessly. They spent most of the period trying to avoid participation, while Nathan whispered about quantum mechanics and temporal displacement theory. The harassment continued during their cooking assignment in home economics, where Nathan's distracted explanations of his time travel project resulted in several minor culinary disasters. The genius who could solve complex physics equations was completely helpless when faced with the practical challenge of following a recipe, and his continued focus on time travel made him even more useless in the kitchen. Nathan explained his need for someone with hardware expertise, acknowledging that his theoretical knowledge needed to be combined with practical engineering skills if his project was ever going to move beyond computer simulations. He had identified Marcus as someone with the mechanical aptitude necessary to turn theory into reality, though Marcus wasn't sure he possessed the skills that Nathan was attributing to him. Nathan fell silent whenever Jeanette appeared in their vicinity, his obvious discomfort with her attention creating awkward moments that made everyone involved uncomfortable. Jeanette seemed oblivious to Nathan's desire to avoid her, or perhaps she simply chose to ignore his obvious signals in favor of pursuing her romantic agenda. Noticing that Marcus and Nathan were failing spectacularly at their culinary assignment, Jeanette generously offered to share her perfectly prepared meringue with them. Her cooking skills were as impressive as her academic achievements, and she moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had been learning domestic arts since childhood. Nathan remained focused solely on science, his obsession with the time travel project making it impossible for him to concentrate on anything else. He continued badgering Marcus about joining his team, wearing down his friend's resistance through sheer persistence and the kind of logical arguments that made refusal seem unreasonable. Marcus finally agreed to help, but only if he could choose their destination and time period, a condition that gave him some measure of control over what seemed like an increasingly crazy enterprise. Nathan wasted no time agreeing to this demand, his desperation for assistance making him willing to accept almost any terms that Marcus might propose. After school, they were strolling down the hallway when they encountered Tyler working alone in the automotive shop, his leather jacket replaced by coveralls as he welded an engine with the skill and confidence of a professional mechanic. The sparks from his welding torch created dramatic patterns in the air, and the smell of hot metal filled the workshop with an industrial aroma that spoke of serious work being accomplished. Marcus proposed recruiting Tyler as their hardware specialist, recognizing that the motorcycle-riding rebel possessed exactly the kind of practical engineering skills that Nathan's project would require. Tyler's father built monster trucks for a living, and the mechanical knowledge had apparently been passed down through generations of hands-on experience. When Tyler noticed the two geeks standing outside his workshop, he lifted his welding mask and studied them with curious interest. His expression suggested that he was trying to determine whether they were there to mock his work or to ask for help, and he seemed prepared for either possibility. Marcus explained their situation in carefully neutral terms, describing Nathan's project as an interesting technical challenge rather than a potential breakthrough in theoretical physics. Tyler listened with growing interest, his questions revealing a sophisticated understanding of engineering principles and mechanical systems. All three boys, along with Nathan's cat, Mr. Whiskers, eventually headed to Marcus's house, where the suburban setting provided a stark contrast to the industrial atmosphere of Tyler's workshop. Marcus's family home was comfortable but unremarkable, the kind of middle-class residence that suggested financial stability without excessive wealth. Tyler examined Nathan's time machine blueprints with the critical eye of someone who understood the difference between theoretical designs and practical construction. He asked detailed questions about power requirements, structural integrity, and safety protocols, his technical knowledge impressing even Nathan. Amy, Marcus's younger sister, came downstairs hoping to find cute boys visiting her brother, but her romantic expectations were quickly disappointed by the sight of three teenage geeks hunched over technical drawings. She retreated to her room with obvious disgust, her dreams of meeting potential boyfriends dashed by the reality of her brother's social circle. Tyler announced that he would take on the project, his decision based primarily on his appreciation for difficult technical challenges, and Nathan's promise that participating in the project would include regular access to home-cooked meals. The prospect of free food was apparently enough to tip the scales in favor of what most people would have considered an impossible undertaking. They relocated their operation to Thompson's Cycle Cemetery, a sprawling junkyard that Tyler had mentioned as the perfect location for their secret project. The junkyard was owned by Tyler's uncle, who had given his nephew unlimited access to the property and its fully equipped workshop in exchange for occasional help with salvage operations. The workshop was a mechanic's dream, filled with tools and equipment that would have cost thousands of dollars to purchase new. Tyler worked on the time machine with the methodical precision of a master craftsman, while Nathan and Marcus served as assistants and consultants on the theoretical aspects of the project. While Tyler wielded wrenches and welding torches, they discussed potential destinations for their first temporal expedition. Marcus suggested traveling back in time to win the lottery, his practical mind immediately focusing on the financial possibilities that time travel might offer. The idea of using future knowledge to gain wealth seemed like the most obvious application of their incredible technology. Nathan opposed using their invention for personal gain, his scientific ethics preventing him from viewing time travel as a path to easy money. He argued that their discovery should be used for the betterment of humanity rather than individual enrichment, though he struggled to articulate exactly what noble purposes time travel might serve. Marcus reminded Nathan of his promise to let him choose their destination, holding his friend to the bargain they had struck when Nathan was desperate for assistance. The agreement had been clear, and Marcus wasn't about to let Nathan's sudden attack of conscience invalidate their deal. Tyler warned that the completed machine would consume enormous amounts of electrical power and require significant space for safe operation. The energy requirements alone would be enough to drain the school's entire electrical system, and the spatial distortions created by temporal displacement would need room to form without interfering with existing structures. Nathan knew exactly the perfect location for their secret project, his mind immediately turning to the unused spaces within Riverside High School that might serve their purposes. The school building was old and large, with plenty of forgotten rooms and storage areas that hadn't been used in years. The next day, they tracked down Vice Principal Henderson near the faculty vending machine, where the administrator was engaged in a frustrated battle with a machine that refused to accept his crumpled $20 bill. Henderson's face was red with exasperation as he smoothed the bill repeatedly and fed it into the slot, only to have it rejected again and again. They noticed that Chester had somehow gotten stuck inside the vending machine itself, his muffled cries for help providing an absurd soundtrack to Henderson's monetary struggles. The sight of a student trapped behind glass like an oversized snack was both hilarious and disturbing, but Henderson seemed more concerned with his lunch than with Chester's predicament. Henderson had no intention of helping the trapped student, his priorities clearly focused on satisfying his own hunger rather than addressing what most people would consider an emergency situation. His callous indifference to Chester's plight revealed the kind of bureaucratic mindset that put procedures above people. When Nathan made his request for access to room 77, Henderson initially refused without bothering to consider the proposal. Room 77 had been closed for years, and the vice principal saw no reason to open it for a group of students with some vague project that they couldn't adequately explain. Marcus solved Henderson's vending machine crisis by offering quarters in exchange for the room key, a simple transaction that revealed how easily the administrator's principles could be compromised. Henderson accepted the deal with obvious relief, his need for food overriding his initial reluctance to accommodate the student's request. They navigated through corridors filled with abandoned equipment and forgotten supplies before finally reaching room 77. The space hadn't been used in years, and thick layers of dust covered every surface like grey snow. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling corners like tattered curtains, and the air smelled of neglect and abandonment. The room was larger than they had expected, with high ceilings and multiple electrical outlets that suggested it had once served some important function in the school's operations. Old chemistry equipment sat forgotten on metal shelves, and several broken computers were stacked in one corner like technological fossils. Together, all three boys began the laborious process of transforming the neglected space into a functional laboratory. They spent hours peeling away cobwebs, sweeping accumulated dust, and moving useless equipment to create room for their project. The work was tedious and dirty, but it felt like the first concrete step toward making Nathan's impossible dream a reality. After cleaning, they embarked on the challenging task of acquiring the necessary equipment for their time machine. This involved borrowing spare parts and outdated computers from various locations throughout the school, a process that required careful planning and flawless execution to avoid detection. They combined these salvaged materials over several weeks, working after school and during lunch periods to avoid attracting attention from teachers or administrators. Tyler's mechanical expertise proved invaluable as he modified and connected components that had never been designed to work together. The process was like building a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. Nathan provided theoretical guidance, but much of their work involved trial and error, testing different configurations until they found combinations that seemed to function properly. Eventually, after weeks of effort and countless small failures, Nathan declared their time machine ready for its first test. The device looked nothing like the sleek time machines from science fiction movies, instead resembling a bizarre hybrid of laboratory equipment and automotive parts held together by determination and electrical tape. Nathan activated the device with the reverence of someone performing a sacred ritual, his hands trembling slightly as he engaged the power sequence that they had tested dozens of times in theory, but never in practice. Purple light began swirling above the machine, forming a mesmerizing vortex that seemed to bend reality around its edges. The vortex was beautiful and terrifying, a window into forces that human beings were never meant to control. The air around it shimmered with energy, and strange sounds emanated from its depths like whispers from another dimension. They had actually done it. They had created a gateway through time itself. They celebrated their achievement with the unbridled enthusiasm of people who had accomplished something that most scientists would have considered impossible. They screamed and jumped around like excited children, their earlier skepticism forgotten in the face of undeniable success. However, none of them felt brave enough to volunteer as the first test subject for their incredible invention. The vortex was beautiful, but it was also utterly alien, and none of them could overcome their very reasonable fear of stepping into something that might transport them to another time period or simply disintegrate them into component atoms. Mr. Whiskers, Nathan's cat, became the perfect unwitting test subject when Tyler, while Nathan was distracted by technical readings, quietly attached a rope, protective goggles, and a digital watch to the unsuspecting feline. The cat accepted these additions with the patient resignation that domestic animals showed toward their humans' incomprehensible behavior. Tyler gently tossed the cat into the swirling vortex before Nathan could object. the poor animal disappearing into the purple light with a startled yowl that was quickly swallowed by the temporal distortion. Nathan nearly lost his mind with worry and rage, imagining that his beloved pet had been destroyed by their reckless experiment. They quickly pulled Mr. Whiskers back using the rope, their relief enormous when the cat emerged from the vortex apparently unharmed but covered in snow from some winter day in the past or future. The digital watch showed a 1-minute time difference compared to their current timeline, providing concrete proof that their impossible invention actually worked. This evidence was all they needed to confirm that they had successfully created a functional time machine. Mr. Whiskers seemed more annoyed than traumatized by his temporal adventure, shaking snow from his fur with typical feline dignity before stalking away to find a warm place to nap. Meanwhile, at Pacific Technology Institute, a government research facility located 50 miles from Riverside, Dr. Richardson was monitoring sensor networks that detected unusual electromagnetic fluctuations throughout the region. His computer screens showed energy readings that defied conventional explanation, suggesting that someone or something was manipulating forces that should have been beyond current technological capabilities. Dr. Richardson suspected that something significant was happening in the Riverside area, but his colleague Dr. Martinez remained skeptical about the readings. Martinez had seen too many false alarms and equipment malfunctions over the years to get excited about anomalous data, and he convinced Richardson that they were probably looking at another technical glitch rather than a genuine scientific breakthrough. In the school library the next day, Marcus positioned himself near the science fiction section, where he could observe Brandon and Jessica without being obvious about his surveillance. He watched them argue in hushed but intense tones about Brandon being too friendly with a girl named Ashley, their relationship clearly experiencing the kind of stress that came with popularity and the constant attention of other attractive people. Jessica's jealousy was evident in her posture and tone, while Brandon's defensive responses suggested that he wasn't entirely innocent of the behavior she was criticizing. Their argument had the feel of a conversation they had already had multiple times, with each person repeating familiar positions without finding resolution. Marcus overheard enough of their conversation to understand the basic conflict, and he waited for Brandon to leave before approaching Jessica with the careful timing of someone who had been planning this intervention. She was clearly upset, her usual composure shaken by whatever Brandon had said during their argument. They reminisced about their childhood with the bittersweet nostalgia of people remembering a simpler time when their relationships hadn't been complicated by romantic jealousy and social hierarchies. Jessica assured Marcus that Brandon had actually tried to stop the upperclassmen on the day of the incident, a detail that Marcus had never known, but that somehow made their subsequent alienation even more painful. Later that afternoon, Marcus, Tyler, and Nathan prepared for their first human test of the time machine by changing into thick winter jackets designed for the cold temperatures they expected to encounter in the temporal vortex. They had learned from Mr. Whiskers' snow-covered return that time travel apparently involved exposure to different weather conditions. They had carefully researched and prepared the winning lottery numbers from 3 years in the past, Marcus's original plan for using their time travel technology to gain financial advantage. The numbers were written on a piece of paper that Marcus had memorized and triple-checked, his practical mind focused on the concrete benefits that time travel might provide. Nathan had calculated that they could only spend 10 minutes in the past to avoid creating dangerous temporal paradoxes that might alter history in unpredictable ways. 10 minutes seemed like a very short time to accomplish anything meaningful, but Nathan insisted that longer exposures to alternative timelines could have catastrophic consequences for the fabric of reality itself. Nathan activated the time machine with growing confidence, his familiarity with the device's operation making the process seem almost routine despite its incredible nature. One after another, they leaped into the swirling vortex, the sensation of temporal displacement unlike anything they had ever experienced. Nathan nearly chickened out at the last moment, his scientific caution warring with his curiosity and desire to test his theories. Tyler grabbed him and jumped together, their combined weight carrying them both into the purple maelstrom that would transport them through the barriers of time itself. All the school lights began flickering ominously as reality briefly rewound around their departure point. The massive energy drain of the time machine affecting electrical systems throughout the building. For a few moments, the very fabric of space-time seemed to ripple like water, creating optical illusions and strange sensations that made everyone in the school feel vaguely dizzy. The trio was expelled from the temporal vortex with tremendous force, landing in a heap on cold pavement that definitely wasn't part of their high school. They found themselves in what appeared to be the same location, but 3 years in the past, the familiar surroundings subtly different in ways that confirmed they had successfully traveled through time. They agreed that they needed to work on their landing techniques, as arriving in the past as a tangled pile of teenagers wasn't exactly the dignified entrance they had envisioned for their temporal adventures. Nathan couldn't stop shouting with excitement that they were actual time travelers, his scientific mind overwhelmed by the reality of what they had accomplished. They hurried to the nearest convenience store, a small shop that Marcus remembered from 3 years ago, but which looked slightly different in subtle ways that reminded them they were genuine visitors from the future. The lottery machine was exactly where Marcus remembered it, and he approached the clerk with growing excitement about their plan. Unfortunately, when they requested a lottery ticket with their predetermined numbers, they discovered that only people 18 or older could purchase tickets, and none of them qualified under the age restriction. This bureaucratic obstacle hadn't occurred to them during their planning, and it threatened to derail their entire mission. Desperate and running out of time, they went outside where they encountered a street performer dressed as a silver robot, his metallic costume gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as he entertained passing pedestrians with mechanical movements and electronic sound effects. The robot performer seemed like their only option for circumventing the age restriction. Mid-negotiation with the robot man, Nathan warned that they only had 2 minutes remaining before their 10-minute limit expired and they would need to return to their own timeline. The pressure of their ticking deadline made it difficult to explain their situation coherently, and the robot performer clearly thought they were either crazy or playing some elaborate prank. They promised the robot man that they would return at noon the following day with payment for his services, then ran frantically back to their temporal exit point where the return vortex was already beginning to form. The experience of racing through the past while watching familiar landmarks from a different time period was surreal and exhilarating. At Pacific Technology Institute, Dr. Richardson registered another significant electromagnetic fluctuation on his monitoring equipment, the readings even more dramatic than before. Again, his colleague Dr. Martinez convinced him that they were looking at equipment malfunction rather than genuine anomalies, though Richardson was beginning to suspect that something extraordinary was really happening. By the next day, in their original timeline, reporters and curious onlookers had gathered at the convenience store to interview and congratulate the robot performer for winning the lottery with the exact numbers that Marcus had provided. The silver-painted street performer was clearly bewildered by his sudden good fortune, but he was happy to accept the attention and prize money. Nathan and his friends arrived at the convenience store as planned, their hearts sinking as they witnessed the success of their plan benefiting someone else rather than themselves. The robot performer's joy was infectious, but it was also a painful reminder that their time travel experiment had succeeded perfectly, except for the crucial detail of actually obtaining the lottery ticket themselves. They returned to their own timeline feeling dejected and frustrated, the theoretical success of their mission overshadowed by their practical failure to achieve their intended goal. Marcus still hoped to purchase another lottery ticket using their knowledge of future winning numbers, but Nathan firmly refused to continue using their invention for personal financial gain. Nathan climbed onto a locker room bench and slammed Marcus against the metal lockers with surprising force, his usually mild-mannered personality transformed by righteous anger about the ethical implications of their actions. He demanded that Marcus stop thinking about using their incredible invention for selfish gain, arguing that time travel should be used for more noble purposes. Meanwhile, Chester was experiencing another humiliating episode as bullies stole his clothes while he was changing for gym class. The poor student found himself forced to venture into the hallway wearing only a towel, his face burning with embarrassment as other students stared and whispered about his predicament. The towel was subsequently snatched away by the same cruel students who had stolen his clothes, leaving Chester completely naked in a crowded hallway while his tormentors laughed at his humiliation. Vice Principal Henderson witnessed this cruelty but did nothing to help, his indifference to student suffering continuing to demonstrate his fundamental failure as an educator and protector. Watching this injustice unfold, Marcus experienced a moment of inspiration that would change the direction of their time travel experiments. Instead of using their technology for personal gain, they could become anonymous champions for the students who were suffering under the current social order. Nathan and Marcus approached Tyler with a comprehensive plan to become unsung heroes for the socially downtrodden students who were regularly victimized by bullies and ignored by administrators. Marcus suggested calling themselves the Guardians, a name that reflected their mission to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Tyler thought the name was somewhat lame, but agreed that the concept had merit, particularly since it would allow them to use their time travel technology for purposes that were both exciting and morally defensible. The idea of becoming superheroes through temporal intervention appealed to all three boys, who had spent years feeling powerless against the social forces that governed their high school experience. Their next mission would require making real-time adjustments to the time machine while they were in the past, meaning that one person would have to stay behind in the present to operate the controls and monitor their temporal displacement. This operational requirement created a logistical challenge that they needed to solve before proceeding with their Guardian activities. Twice in a row, Nathan drew the short straw during their random selection process, a coincidence that frustrated him since he was eager to experience more time travel and witness the results of his scientific breakthrough firsthand. Tyler and Marcus were sympathetic, but also relieved that they wouldn't have to miss the excitement of their temporal missions. They were debating alternative selection methods when Jeanette appeared with a membership form for the club that Nathan had created to secure access to room 77. Her arrival provided an unexpected solution to their personnel problem, though Nathan was initially reluctant to involve her in their secret project. Marcus suggested that Jeanette could learn to make basic adjustments to the time machine while they traveled through time, pointing out that her academic achievements and attention to detail made her perfect for the role. Nathan initially refused this suggestion, partly because he was uncomfortable with Jeanette's obvious romantic interest, and partly because he worried about maintaining the secrecy of their operation. They eventually convinced Nathan to teach Jeanette the basic operations necessary for temporal support, though her first action was to turn off the machine in disgust at their shabby winter clothing. Instead of their makeshift cold-weather gear, she provided pristine white snowsuits from her wealthy father's extensive collection of outdoor equipment. The snowsuits were professional-grade winter gear that made them look like Arctic explorers or elite ski patrol members rather than amateur time travelers. The transformation in their appearance was dramatic, giving them a mysterious and official look that would prove crucial to their success as temporal guardians. The three boys jumped into the temporal vortex, wearing their new uniforms, and arrived in the past just as Chester discovered that his clothes had been stolen by bullies. The terrified student initially thought they were there to torment him further, his experience with older students having taught him to expect the worst from any unexpected encounter. When he realized that the mysterious figures in white snowsuits had actually come bearing replacement clothing, Chester's relief was overwhelming. The clothes they provided were clean, properly sized, and fashionable enough to transform his appearance from victim to confident young man. In the hallway, Chester's tormentors waited with anticipation to laugh at his humiliation, their cruel entertainment depending on his public embarrassment. Instead, they were shocked when he emerged from the locker room, looking like a confident, well-dressed young man who clearly belonged in their social environment. The bullies' confusion was evident as they tried to process this unexpected development. Their planned harassment derailed by Chester's transformation from victim to someone who looked like he might actually fight back. The psychological effect of the clothing change was remarkable, boosting Chester's confidence while undermining his tormentor's sense of superiority. The trio ran through hallways that were both familiar and strange, their presence confusing other students who weren't sure what to make of three figures in matching white snowsuits moving through the school with obvious purpose. Their mysterious appearance generated excitement and speculation, with students beginning to refer to them as the snowsuit guys, after their distinctive uniforms. Further down the corridor, Vice Principal Henderson was admiring his precious historical diorama, a detailed model of some Civil War battle that represented months of meticulous work and historical research. The diorama was Henderson's pride and joy, a demonstration of his passion for history and his attention to detail. Nathan and the others accidentally crashed into the display case while fleeing from the scene of their good deed, completely destroying Henderson's beloved diorama in a cascade of broken glass and scattered miniature soldiers. The destruction was total and heartbreaking, turning months of careful work into debris in a matter of seconds. They escaped safely from the scene of the accident, returning to room 77 in their own timeline as planned. After changing back into their regular clothes, they could hear Henderson's voice echoing through the hallways as he promised to find and punish whoever had destroyed his precious historical project. Later that week, Tyler visited the burger restaurant near school to grab food and witnessed another example of the casual cruelty that characterized social interactions at Riverside High School. The restaurant was popular with students, and Tyler had hoped to eat in peace while observing the social dynamics that he usually avoided. Ashley, one of the more popular girls, approached Eugene, the socially awkward cashier who worked part-time to help support his family. She convinced him to personally deliver food to her table with false promises of friendship and inclusion that Eugene desperately wanted to believe. Eugene was excited by what seemed like genuine interest from a popular student, and he hurried across the restaurant carrying the food order with careful attention to avoid spilling anything. His eagerness to please was touching and painful to watch, particularly since Tyler could see the trap that was being prepared. Ashley had deliberately removed the wet floor sign from an area that had just been mopped, creating a hazard that Eugene couldn't see as he approached her table. The setup was deliberate and cruel, designed to cause maximum embarrassment for someone who was already struggling with social acceptance. The result was predictable. Eugene slipped spectacularly on the wet floor, spilling food all over himself, while the entire restaurant erupted in laughter at his misfortune. The humiliation was complete and public, the kind of experience that would haunt Eugene for months or years to come. Everyone in the restaurant laughed at Eugene's accident except Tyler, who was disgusted by the deliberate cruelty of Ashley's setup. The fact that other students found this kind of planned humiliation entertaining revealed something deeply troubling about the social environment at their school. Tyler brought this case to the attention of the guardians, and they appeared in the past just in time to catch Eugene before he fell, gently lowering him and the food to safety while simultaneously spilling dirty mop water all over Ashley and her cruel friends. The reversal of fortune was poetic and satisfying, with the intended victim becoming the hero while the bullies experienced their own public humiliation. Again, students throughout the restaurant praised the mysterious snowsuit guys for their intervention, though no one could explain who they were or where they had come from. The Guardians' reputation began to grow as stories of their interventions spread throughout the school. Vice Principal Henderson, convinced that the ski club was responsible for both the destroyed diorama and the restaurant incident, ambushed the actual ski club members with security officers. The innocent students were quickly cleared of any wrongdoing, but Henderson's investigation revealed the growing influence of the mysterious figures who seemed to appear whenever justice was needed. It became routine for Nathan and his friends to rescue innocent students from various humiliating situations, their temporal interventions creating a sense that unseen forces were protecting the vulnerable and punishing the cruel. They prevented a shy girl from being embarrassed during a class presentation, saved another student from getting stuck in a vending machine, and helped someone avoid walking around with a toilet seat cover stuck to his shoe. Unfortunately, their success was attracting unwanted attention from sources far more dangerous than Vice Principal Henderson. Scientists at Pacific Technology Institute had become certain that something extraordinary was happening at Riverside High School, and their reports had reached federal agencies that took such anomalies very seriously. Government agents were dispatched to conduct surveillance on the Guardians, photographing Tyler at the junkyard, following Marcus around the supermarket, and tracking Nathan from unmarked vehicles that tried but failed to blend into suburban traffic patterns. The level of attention suggested that their time travel activities had been detected by monitoring systems they hadn't known existed. Something strange began happening to the students they had rescued. Instead of remaining grateful for their interventions, all of them started displaying hostile attitudes toward Nathan, Marcus, and Tyler. Eugene, who had been saved from public humiliation, now treated them with contempt and derision. Even Chester, whose clothing emergency they had resolved, began referring to them as losers and avoiding their company. This unexpected development was puzzling and concerning, suggesting that their time travel activities might be having unintended consequences on the people they were trying to help. The students they had rescued seemed to remember being helped, but didn't remember who had helped them, leading to a disconnect between their gratitude and their current behavior. They were trying to process this disturbing trend when Jessica approached their table wearing a snowsuit guy's t-shirt that someone had created to capitalize on the mysterious figure's growing popularity. Her excitement was infectious as she embraced Marcus and announced her acceptance to UC Berkeley with a full cheerleading scholarship. Jessica explained that UC Berkeley was sending a scout to evaluate her performance during an upcoming competition, and she was confident that her skills and leadership would earn her the scholarship that would pay for her entire college education. Her dreams were finally within reach, and her happiness was genuine and compelling. Brandon interrupted their conversation with his usual territorial behavior, positioning himself between Marcus and Jessica in a way that clearly marked his claim on her attention. Jessica reluctantly said goodbye to Marcus, her disappointment at the interruption obvious but not sufficient to challenge Brandon's possessive behavior. When Marcus sat down at the outcast's table, he could tell immediately that something was wrong with Nathan. The young genius looked pale and distressed, his usual confidence replaced by obvious anxiety about something he had discovered during his latest research into their time travel activities. Nathan confessed to a critical problem with their time travel calculations that threatened to destroy their entire operation. He had needed additional data to complete his temporal displacement formula, and in his desperation, he had illegally hacked into NASA's classified databases to obtain the missing information. The realization that they had committed a federal crime sent all three boys into panic mode, their fear of imprisonment overwhelming their ability to think rationally about their situation. They huddled under the cafeteria table like children hiding from monsters, their paranoia making them imagine FBI agents around every corner. When they finally emerged from their hiding place, they discovered that everyone in the cafeteria was staring at their bizarre behavior with obvious amusement and concern. Their public display of paranoia had only served to attract more attention to themselves, exactly the opposite of what they needed while under federal investigation. The weekend passed quickly, filled with anxiety about their legal situation and uncertainty about whether they should continue their guardian activities. Marcus found himself thinking constantly about Jessica and her upcoming cheerleading evaluation, knowing that this opportunity represented everything she had worked toward for years. Monday arrived with devastating news. Marcus found Jessica sitting alone in the cafeteria with a cast on her leg, her dreams of a Berkeley scholarship shattered by a fall from the cheerleading pyramid during practice. The injury had occurred during a routine that she had performed hundreds of times before, but one small mistake had been enough to destroy years of preparation and planning. She made eye contact with Marcus across the cafeteria, and he could see the devastation in her expression. The scholarship opportunity was gone, her college plans were in ruins, and her future had been fundamentally altered by a moment of bad luck that no one could have predicted or prevented. Marcus couldn't bear to see Jessica's dreams destroyed by what seemed like a simple accident that their time travel technology could easily prevent. He proposed to Tyler and Nathan that they travel back to stop Jessica's injury, arguing that this was exactly the kind of mission that justified the risks they were taking with their temporal interventions. Nathan reminded him that they were already under federal surveillance and that additional time travel activities would only increase their chances of being caught and prosecuted. The logical argument was sound, but Marcus's emotional investment in Jessica's welfare made it impossible for him to accept inaction as a reasonable response. Despite the enormous risks involved, Marcus convinced his friends to help him save Jessica's scholarship opportunity. The mission would be their most dangerous yet, requiring precision timing and flawless execution while federal agents were actively monitoring their activities. Seconds after arriving in the past, Tyler commandeered an unattended maintenance vehicle, a small electric cart used by groundskeepers to transport equipment around the school grounds. Nathan and Marcus climbed aboard the cart, their white snowsuits making them look like Arctic maintenance workers as they drove across the practice field. As they crossed the field, they caught the attention of Vice Principal Henderson, who had been driving past the school and stopped his car to investigate what appeared to be unauthorized use of school equipment. Henderson's suspicion was immediate and intense, his bureaucratic instincts alerted by anything that seemed out of place or irregular. While Henderson was distracted by their presence, Eugene accidentally kicked a soccer ball during a nearby physical education class, the ball flying directly toward Jessica's head as she balanced at the top of the cheerleading pyramid. The impact would have knocked her off the formation and caused the injury that had destroyed her scholarship opportunity. At that crucial moment, the Guardians were perfectly positioned to intervene. Marcus dove forward with athletic grace that surprised even himself, catching Jessica before she could hit the ground and absorbing the impact of her fall with his own body. The save was spectacular and heroic, exactly the kind of intervention that their time travel technology made possible, Jessica, not recognizing Marcus behind his snowsuit and protective goggles, admitted that he was amazing and that she had never seen anything like his reflexes and timing. However, one word that Marcus spoke in response made her suspicious, his familiar voice triggering recognition despite his disguise. Henderson had climbed the chain-link fence around the practice field and was approaching their location with the determination of someone who intended to get answers about their unauthorized presence. Unfortunately for him, the Guardians were already retreating to their temporal exit point, leaving him with nothing but questions and frustration. After returning to their own timeline, they discovered that their intervention had created unintended consequences that were far worse than Jessica's original injury. Chester, who had previously been a victim of bullying, had somehow become a bully himself, terrorizing younger students with the same cruelty that he had once experienced. A newspaper revealed that the robot performer they had enriched in their lottery scheme was now suing an elderly woman over the prize money, claiming that she had somehow stolen his ticket, despite clear evidence to the contrary. The legal battle was destroying the woman's savings and reputation, turning their good deed into a source of suffering for an innocent person. This revelation was the final straw for Nathan's patience with their time travel activities. He began to panic, convinced that their temporal interventions were causing a dangerous chain reaction that was altering reality in unpredictable and harmful ways. The unintended consequences of their actions were becoming more serious and widespread with each mission. Nathan stormed away after shouting at his friends about the dangers they were creating, leaving Marcus to awkwardly explain their public argument to confused onlookers who had no context for understanding their dispute. The partnership that had created such amazing technology was falling apart under the weight of ethical concerns and unintended consequences. School ended normally that day, and Marcus headed home to engage in the mundane task of sweeping leaves from his family's lawn. The ordinary nature of yard work provided a stark contrast to the extraordinary adventures he had been experiencing, reminding him that most of life consisted of simple, repetitive tasks rather than dramatic time travel missions. Jessica suddenly appeared at his house, claiming that she had come to thank him for saving her from injury during cheerleading practice. Marcus tried to deny any involvement in her rescue, but his protests lacked conviction and only served to confirm her suspicions about his identity. She had concluded that the Guardians must be psychic individuals who could predict accidents before they happened, a theory that seemed more plausible to her than the reality of time travel. Marcus found himself unable to maintain his denials when Jessica pressed for the truth with the persistence of someone who knew she was right. Marcus accidentally revealed that they were actually time travelers rather than psychics, a slip of the tongue that should have sounded ridiculous but somehow made perfect sense to Jessica. The revelation explained everything she had observed about their interventions and their uncanny ability to appear at exactly the right moment to prevent disasters. This disclosure piqued Jessica's interest even more than her psychic theory had, and she began asking detailed questions about the mechanics of time travel and the scope of their abilities. Her excitement about the possibilities was infectious, and Marcus found himself enjoying her attention and curiosity despite the dangers of revealing their secret. Later that week, Nathan, Marcus, and Tyler attended a crucial football game where the Riverside Eagles were playing their longtime rivals, the Hamilton Hawks. The game had playoff implications, and the entire school had turned out to support their team in what promised to be an intense and closely contested match. With 6 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter and the Eagles trailing by 1 point, the coach called Brandon aside for an intense pep talk that the entire crowd could witness. The coach's animated gestures and obvious urgency communicated the importance of the moment, and Brandon nodded with the determination of someone who understood that his team's season depended on his performance. The coach urged Brandon to become one with the ball, to trust his instincts and ignore the pressure of the situation. The advice was both practical and psychological, designed to help Brandon achieve the focus necessary to execute a perfect play under impossible circumstances. The game resumed with Brandon taking the snap and dropping back to pass, his movements fluid and confident as he scanned the field for open receivers. The crowd held its breath as he cocked his arm and prepared to throw what could be the winning touchdown pass of the season. Unfortunately, Chester suddenly appeared on the field wearing only boxer shorts, running along the sidelines in a state of obvious distress that immediately captured the attention of players, coaches, and spectators. His unexpected appearance was both hilarious and horrifying, creating exactly the kind of distraction that could derail even the most focused athlete. The sight of Chester's streaking run caused Brandon to lose concentration at the crucial moment, his attention divided between his passing responsibilities and the bizarre spectacle unfolding nearby. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but that delay was enough to allow the opposing team's linebacker to break through the offensive line and tackle him before he could release the ball. The tackle resulted in a turnover that gave the Hamilton Hawks possession of the ball with only seconds remaining, effectively ending the Eagles' season and crushing the hopes of everyone who had been counting on Brandon's heroic performance. The loss was devastating, made even more painful by the knowledge that victory had been within reach. Jessica, now aware of Marcus's secret abilities as a time traveler, approached him the following day with a brilliant idea that seemed to offer a solution to their football disaster. She had revealed the truth about time travel to Brandon, convincing him that Marcus possessed the power to change the outcome of the game. Together, Jessica and Brandon visited Marcus with a carefully prepared appeal that combined logical arguments with emotional manipulation. They pleaded with Marcus to travel back in time and prevent Chester's embarrassing streak, arguing that the intervention would serve both the team's interests and Chester's dignity. Brandon was particularly determined to convince Marcus, his desperation evident as he reminded his former friend of their childhood bond and the promises they had made to always support each other. He recreated their special secret handshake, a gesture from their past that carried powerful emotional weight, and reminded Marcus of happier times when their friendship had been uncomplicated. The nostalgic gesture was incredibly effective, triggering memories of their shared childhood and the loyalty they had once felt toward each other. Marcus found himself unable to refuse Brandon's request, his rational concerns about temporal interference overwhelmed by his emotional desire to help his former best friend. Marcus brought the proposal back to Nathan and Tyler, presenting it as a humanitarian mission to help both their football team and the unfortunate Chester. Nathan remained convinced that their time traveling was unraveling the fabric of space-time, while Tyler maintained his usual indifference to the broader implications of their actions. Regardless of their philosophical differences, Marcus managed to convince both of his friends to participate in what he promised would be their final temporal mission. The argument that they could solve multiple problems with a single intervention was compelling, even though Nathan continued to express serious reservations about the wisdom of additional time travel. They prepared for the mission with their usual careful attention to detail, checking their equipment and coordinating their timing to ensure that they could prevent Chester's streak without creating additional problems. Marcus slipped a recording device into his snowsuit, hoping to capture evidence of their successful intervention. Marcus leaped into the temporal vortex with the confidence of someone who had performed this action many times before. The familiar sensation of temporal displacement no longer frightening or disorienting. Minutes later, they returned to their own timeline, where Jeanette was waiting to show them the morning newspaper. The newspaper's sports section confirmed that they had successfully changed Brandon's fate and helped the Eagles achieve victory in their crucial game. The headline celebrated Brandon's heroic performance and the team's advancement to the playoffs, exactly the outcome that their intervention had been designed to achieve. Marcus later showed the recording of Brandon's original defeat to Jessica and Brandon, providing undeniable proof that he possessed the ability to alter past events and change the course of history. The evidence was overwhelming and impressive, demonstrating the true scope of their time travel technology. Brandon was so thrilled by the confirmation of Marcus's abilities that he invited his former friend to a celebration party at his house, an invitation that represented a restoration of their social relationship and Marcus's acceptance into the popular crowd that had previously excluded him. Marcus was supposed to meet Nathan that evening as they had planned, but he chose to attend Brandon's party instead, abandoning his friend without explanation or apology. The decision revealed how quickly Marcus's priorities could shift when offered acceptance by the people who had previously rejected him. The party was crowded with popular students who welcomed Marcus as a hero and celebrity, their attention and admiration intoxicating after years of social isolation. Marcus found himself enjoying the experience of being accepted and celebrated, his previous loyalty to fellow outcasts temporarily forgotten in the excitement of newfound popularity. Marcus managed to navigate through the crowd of party guests and positioned himself beside Jessica on a comfortable couch. Their conversation flowing easily for the first time in years, they discussed their shared memories and current aspirations. The comfortable familiarity of their childhood friendship temporarily restored. Unfortunately, Brandon appeared and positioned himself between Marcus and Jessica with obvious territorial intent, ruining the intimate moment and reminding Marcus that his acceptance into this social circle was conditional and fragile. Brandon's jealousy was immediate and possessive, suggesting that he viewed Marcus as a threat to his relationship despite inviting him to the party. Marcus had completely forgotten about his plans with Nathan, leaving his friend waiting alone while he enjoyed his social triumph at Brandon's party. Nathan arrived at the party later, hoping to find Marcus and wondering why he had been abandoned without explanation. Through a window, Nathan observed Marcus dancing enthusiastically with the popular crowd, his behavior suggesting that he had completely forgotten about their friendship and shared adventures. The sight of Marcus celebrating with the people who had always excluded them was deeply hurtful and represented a betrayal of everything they had built together. Nathan walked home feeling completely betrayed and abandoned, his anger and disappointment growing with each step as he realized that Marcus had chosen popularity over loyalty. The partnership that had created miraculous technology was crumbling because of social pressures and personal ambitions that had nothing to do with their scientific achievements. The next day, Marcus called Nathan to apologize for standing him up, offering his 50th apology in an attempt to repair the damage caused by his thoughtless behavior. His remorse seemed genuine, but the repeated apologies also suggested that he knew his actions had been deeply hurtful and potentially relationship-ending. Another call interrupted Marcus's apology session, and he immediately ended his conversation with Nathan when he realized that Jessica was calling in obvious distress. The choice to prioritize Jessica over Nathan was automatic and thoughtless, further demonstrating how Marcus's loyalties had shifted toward his newly restored popular friendships. Marcus immediately rushed to Jessica's house, climbing up the side of the building to reach her bedroom window in a gesture that was both romantic and dangerous. He accidentally shattered a decorative vase during his climb, the breaking glass announcing his arrival and adding an element of comedy to what was supposed to be a heroic rescue. Jessica was crying uncontrollably when Marcus reached her window, her distress evident as she explained how she had discovered Brandon with Ashley after cheerleading practice. The betrayal was particularly painful because it confirmed her earlier suspicions about Brandon's faithfulness and represented a violation of trust that might end their relationship. She called Marcus an amazing friend while remaining completely oblivious to his romantic feelings for her, her emotional state making it impossible for her to recognize the deeper significance of his immediate response to her distress. Marcus listened and comforted her while privately hoping that Brandon's betrayal might create an opportunity for him to express his true feelings. The situation became even more complicated when Brandon called during their conversation, forcing Marcus to climb back down the precarious route he had used to reach Jessica's window. His descent was less graceful than his ascent, and he fell awkwardly onto the ground like a broken action figure, his romantic gesture ending in physical comedy. That night, the school's athletic field experienced a brief but dramatic reality glitch, with the air shimmering and the ground seeming to ripple like water. The phenomenon lasted only seconds, but it was visible to anyone who happened to be looking in that direction, and suggested that something fundamental was wrong with the space-time continuum. Dr. Richardson at Pacific Technology Institute detected the anomaly immediately, his monitoring equipment registering energy fluctuations that defied conventional explanation. He tried to explain the phenomenon to his supervisor, Dr. Martinez, emphasizing that all of the anomalies were originating from Riverside High School in a pattern that suggested deliberate manipulation rather than natural occurrence. Dr. Martinez began to take the reports more seriously, wondering whether they should contact the FBI or other federal agencies that specialized in investigating unexplained phenomena. The consistent location and increasing frequency of the anomalies suggested that someone at the high school was using technology that shouldn't exist. In the school cafeteria the next day, a federal agent was secretly observing the students while disguised as a substitute teacher, his trained eyes scanning for signs of unusual behavior or technology. Brandon approached Marcus during lunch, asking him to travel back in time to fix his mistake with Jessica and restore their relationship. Marcus excused himself from the conversation, promising to consider Brandon's request while privately struggling with the ethical implications of using time travel to manipulate personal relationships. The request seemed both reasonable and deeply problematic, representing exactly the kind of intervention that Nathan had warned against. On his way home from school, Marcus was walking through his quiet suburban neighborhood when a black van suddenly stopped beside him, and federal agents emerged to apprehend him with professional efficiency. The arrest was quick and coordinated, suggesting that they had been planning this operation for some time and knew exactly who they were targeting. They transported Marcus to a secret facility where he discovered that Tyler and Nathan had already been captured and were being held in a sterile interrogation room that looked like something from a spy movie. The fact that all three guardians had been arrested simultaneously suggested that the federal government had been monitoring their activities for weeks or possibly months. Agent Williams, the team leader, introduced himself with calm professionalism and explained what had happened in 1960 when the United States government had attempted its own time travel experiments. The project had been shut down due to dangerous complications that threatened national security, and the classified files had remained untouched until Nathan's illegal hacking had triggered automated security alerts. Nathan nearly had an emotional breakdown when he realized the full scope of their legal jeopardy, his fears about federal prosecution now confirmed by their actual arrest and detention. Tyler quickly silenced him with a warning glance, recognizing that anything they said could be used against them in subsequent legal proceedings. Marcus challenged Agent Williams about holding them without probable cause or proper legal representation, his knowledge of constitutional rights surprising the federal agent. Williams simply released all three boys without explanation, hoping that continued surveillance would provide the evidence necessary for formal charges. Outside the federal facility, The trio erupted into a bitter argument that revealed the deep tensions that had been building between them for weeks. Tyler and Nathan accused Marcus of abandoning their friendship in favor of newfound popularity, while Marcus defended his actions by pointing out their failure to understand his social needs and ambitions. The argument escalated quickly, with years of suppressed resentment and frustration finally boiling over into open conflict. Nathan walked away entirely when the discussion became too heated, and Tyler followed him after declaring that he had always preferred working alone rather than dealing with group dynamics and interpersonal drama. That night, Nathan ran a complex computer simulation designed to calculate the long-term effects of their time travel activities on the stability of the space-time continuum. His computer was too slow to produce immediate results, so he set the program to run overnight while he tried to sleep, despite his growing anxiety about what the calculations might reveal. Meanwhile, Marcus received another call from Brandon asking for help with changing the past one more time, and he agreed to assist despite his friend's warnings and his own growing doubts about the wisdom of continued temporal interference. The pressure to help his restored friends was stronger than his loyalty to Nathan and Tyler. At dawn, Jeanette appeared in Nathan's bedroom window, shaking him awake with urgent desperation that immediately communicated the seriousness of whatever she had discovered. Nathan initially tried to ignore her intrusion, his focus entirely on checking the results of his overnight computer simulation. When Nathan finally examined the data that his computer had generated during the night, he discovered that their time travel experiments had accidentally created a dangerous gravitational anomaly in the space-time continuum. The repeated temporal rifts hadn't closed as expected, but had instead combined to form a massive distortion that was growing stronger with each passing hour. The simulation showed that they had approximately 4 hours before the gravitational anomaly would reach critical mass and begin consuming matter and energy on a scale that could threaten the entire planet. The black hole that their experiments had created was still small, but growing exponentially, and soon it would be beyond anyone's ability to control or contain. Nathan raced to the federal facility, where he found Dr. Richardson and Dr. Martinez explaining temporal mechanics to Agent Williams and other federal officials. The scientists seemed confident in their theoretical understanding until Nathan mentioned the possibility of a black hole forming from accumulated temporal rifts. Taking control of the briefing with the authority of someone who understood the true scope of the crisis, Nathan explained how their time travel experiments had created tears in the fabric of reality that had combined rather than healing naturally. The accumulated damage had reached a tipping point where it was beginning to affect gravitational fields in ways that could have catastrophic consequences. Instant panic filled the room as everyone realized that they were facing the possibility of their entire world being absorbed into an artificially created black hole. Nathan's calculations suggested that they had only hours remaining to prevent a global catastrophe that would make every other crisis in human history seem trivial by comparison. Agent Williams immediately contacted the White House to inform the president about the situation, while Nathan explained his theoretical plan for reversing the damage they had caused. The plan was extremely dangerous and might not work, but it represented their only chance to prevent the destruction of everything they had ever known. Meanwhile, students at Riverside High School were gathering in the decorated gymnasium for their annual school dance, completely unaware of the reality-threatening crisis that was developing just outside their building. The dance was a major social event that students had been anticipating for weeks, and the gymnasium had been transformed with streamers, balloons, and colored lights. Marcus escorted Jessica to the dance, their rekindled friendship providing him with the date he had dreamed about for years. Tyler sat alone at a table near the refreshment station, flexing his muscles occasionally to impress nearby girls, who seemed more interested in the dancing than in his physical displays. Brandon approached Marcus to confirm that they were still planning to travel back in time that evening to fix his relationship problems with Jessica. Marcus felt conflicted about the request, his romantic feelings for Jessica warring with his loyalty to Brandon and his growing awareness of the dangers associated with temporal manipulation. Marcus encountered Jessica shortly after his conversation with Brandon and almost revealed the plan to change the past. But he was interrupted by Vice Principal Henderson before he could explain the full situation. Henderson's timing was fortunate, preventing Marcus from creating additional complications in an already complex situation. Henderson took the stage and adjusted the microphone with the self-importance of someone who believed that his announcements were the highlight of everyone's evening. After several minutes of terrible jokes that made the audience cringe with second-hand embarrassment, he finally announced the king and queen of the school dance. To everyone's surprise, including Marcus himself, the winners were Marcus and Jessica, their names called out over the sound system while students applauded with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Marcus had never expected to win any kind of popularity contest, and the recognition represented a validation of his improved social status. With their hands intertwined, Marcus and Jessica climbed onto the stage to receive their crowns in a moment that felt like the culmination of Marcus's high school transformation. They stepped down from the stage together, and Marcus confessed that he had traveled back in time to stuff the ballot boxes in his favor, his honesty about the manipulation surprising Jessica, but not angering her. Jessica wasn't upset by this revelation about electoral fraud. Instead, she seemed impressed by his resourcefulness and determination to create this moment between them. They began to slow dance together, the music and atmosphere creating the perfect romantic setting that Marcus had imagined for years. Their perfect moment was interrupted when Brandon appeared with obvious jealousy and territorial behavior, his possessiveness destroying the intimacy that Marcus and Jessica had been sharing. The interruption was both predictable and frustrating, representing the same pattern of interference that had characterized their relationship for years. Nathan and Jeanette arrived at the dance in a state of frantic urgency, pushing through the crowd of dancing students as they searched for Marcus among the hundreds of people packed into the gymnasium. Their obvious distress stood out sharply against the celebratory atmosphere of the dance. After a brief but intense conversation with Jessica, Nathan realized that Marcus might be attempting another time travel mission that evening, a possibility that filled him with terror given what his computer simulations had revealed about the growing gravitational anomaly. He ran through the hallways, searching desperately for Marcus, knowing that any additional temporal interference could trigger the final collapse of space-time stability. Meanwhile, Marcus was finally refusing to help Brandon any further, making it obvious that his romantic feelings for Jessica were the real reason for his reluctance to continue manipulating the past. Their conversation was becoming heated when Nathan burst into the room with the terrifying news that the world would end within the next hour unless they took immediate action. Tyler, Vice Principal Henderson, and crowds of students flooded into the hallway as word of the crisis spread throughout the school. Within moments, federal agents from multiple agencies joined them, the previously secret operation now revealed as a matter of urgent national security. The ground began trembling ominously as officials evacuated most people outside, where they discovered the early stages of a massive black hole dominating the center of the athletic field. The gravitational anomaly was visible as a dark distortion in the air that seemed to bend light around its edges, and small objects were beginning to be drawn toward its center. Complete chaos erupted as scientists, federal agents, and the three Guardians made their way to Room 77, where Nathan's time machine represented their only hope for reversing the catastrophic damage they had accidentally caused. The hallways filled with panicking students and faculty members who didn't understand what was happening, but recognized that something terrible was occurring. In room 77, Nathan explained his desperate plan to save the world from the black hole that their experiments had created. They would have to enter the gravitational anomaly directly and use a specialized remote device to reverse its polarity, essentially turning the destructive force back on itself. Nathan had developed a method for controlling the time machine from inside the black hole itself, a theoretical possibility that had never been tested under actual conditions. He handed the remote device to Tyler, trusting his friend's mechanical skills to operate the equipment under the extreme conditions they would face inside the temporal anomaly. Marcus insisted that he should undertake the mission alone, arguing that his mistakes had created the crisis and that he should bear the full risk of the solution. This led to an argument between all three friends that Agent Williams had to stop before it could escalate into a full confrontation. Eventually, all three Guardians decided to undertake the dangerous mission together, their friendship ultimately stronger than their recent conflicts and disagreements. They suited up in their protective gear and stepped into the hallway, where they were cheered by reporters, students, and officials who understood the magnitude of the sacrifice they were preparing to make. During their walk to the athletic field, Nathan explained that once they successfully repaired the temporal rifts, the black hole might close within minutes, or the process might happen instantly without warning. He also warned that they might return to a completely different time period, as their intervention could fundamentally alter the timeline they had been living in. Tyler and Marcus accepted these possibilities with remarkable equanimity, even joking about Nathan's tendency toward pessimism and worst-case scenario planning. Their humor helped to diffuse some of the tension surrounding their potentially suicidal mission, reminding them that their friendship had always been based on shared laughter and mutual support. It was time for final goodbyes, and each Guardian took a moment to say farewell to the people who mattered most to them. Tyler received embraces from family members and friends, while Nathan froze awkwardly during his farewell to Jeanette, his social discomfort evident even in this dramatic moment. Amy asked her brother Marcus if she could have his bedroom if he didn't return from the mission, her practical approach to his potential death both touching and absurd. With Tyler and Marcus supporting Nathan between them, they made their way onto the school field to face the crowd of supporters who had gathered to witness their departure. Marcus took a special moment to say goodbye to Jessica, their conversation brief but meaningful, as he tried to express feelings that he had never been able to articulate during their years of friendship. The team pulled up their protective hoods as the entire crowd began chanting their names in unison, creating a send-off that was both heroic and deeply moving. Holding hands for mutual support and shared courage, all three Guardians leaped into the black hole together, immediately finding themselves swirling through chaotic time and space that defied human understanding and perception. The experience was like being inside a kaleidoscope made of pure energy, with colors and sensations that had no equivalents in normal reality. After what felt like an eternity of temporal displacement, they fell out of the maelstrom and landed hard in a public park located across town from their school. The transition from the chaos of the black hole to the peaceful normalcy of a suburban park was jarring and disorienting, requiring several minutes for them to regain their bearings and assess their situation. Children playing nearby were fascinated by their sudden appearance, convinced that Nathan and his friends were visitors from outer space who had arrived in some kind of invisible spacecraft. The kids gathered around them with excited curiosity, asking questions about their planet and their technology. Tyler shouted at the children to be quiet and move away, his stress and urgency making him less patient than usual with innocent curiosity. Without wasting any more time on explanations, they unpacked their remote device and began the delicate process of assembling the equipment that might save their world. The antenna was carefully assembled according to Nathan's precise specifications, The reversal sequence was initiated with Tyler's steady hands operating the controls, and stability protocols were engaged to prevent the device from being destroyed by the forces it was designed to manipulate. A brilliant vortex shot out from their device and merged with the black hole that was still visible in the sky above their school, the two energy fields combining in a spectacular display of light and power that was visible for miles around. Within seconds, they achieved stabilization, and the destructive gravitational anomaly began to collapse back on itself. The team celebrated their incredible victory with the enthusiasm of people who had just saved the entire world from destruction, their relief and joy overwhelming after the intense pressure and fear they had been experiencing. They had successfully used their time travel technology to solve the greatest crisis in human history. They only needed to wait 20 minutes for a return vortex to reach ground level, allowing them to travel back to their own time period and resume their normal lives. The waiting period gave them time to process what they had accomplished and to appreciate the magnitude of their achievement. Out of curiosity, Marcus picked up a discarded newspaper from a nearby park bench, hoping to learn something about the current events in whatever time period they had landed in. However, the newspaper revealed that they were now 3 years in the past, specifically on September 3rd, 2005. Even worse, the date was the infamous day of the incident when Nathan's rocket car experiment had first created the quantum acceleration effects that had eventually led to their time travel discovery. This meant that they were witnessing the original catalyst for the entire chain of events that had brought them to this point. While Nathan ranted about the philosophical implications of being present at the beginning of their own timeline, Marcus suddenly began running toward the school with obvious determination. He had realized that they were in a position to prevent the humiliating incident that had defined their high school experience and shaped their entire social trajectory. Within minutes, Marcus burst through the side entrance of the athletic field, his arrival perfectly timed to prevent the bullying incident that had traumatized both him and Nathan years earlier. Nathan and Tyler caught up to him, desperately trying to convince him that changing this fundamental event could have unpredictable consequences for their entire timeline. Nathan reminded Marcus that the day of the incident was also the day he had gained his first true friend, asking him to remember the positive aspects of their shared trauma rather than focusing only on the humiliation and pain. Their friendship had been forged in that moment of mutual vulnerability, and changing the past might prevent their bond from ever forming. Tyler had no particular emotional attachment to the day of the incident, so he simply bid Marcus farewell and walked away, leaving his friend to make his own decision about whether to interfere with the past. His departure was characteristic of his independent nature and his reluctance to become involved in other people's emotional decisions. After Nathan and Tyler left to return to the park, Marcus overheard Brandon and his friends planning to humiliate both him and Nathan in exactly the way he remembered from his original experience. Listening to their cruel plotting, he finally understood who his real friends had always been and what truly mattered in his life. The revelation that Brandon had been an active participant in planning his humiliation rather than an innocent bystander changed Marcus's entire perspective on their relationship. He realized that the friendship he had been trying to restore was based on false memories and wishful thinking rather than genuine mutual respect and affection. Meanwhile, Tyler and Nathan were walking back to the park when Nathan received an urgent notification on his temporal monitoring device. The return vortex had gone into overdrive due to the massive energy expenditures of their black hole intervention, and it would close much sooner than their original calculations had predicted. To avoid being permanently trapped in the past, both boys began running desperately toward the park. But Nathan's physical conditioning wasn't adequate for the sustained sprint required to reach their departure point in time. He stumbled and fell, his exhaustion overwhelming his determination to escape. Nathan had given up hope of reaching the vortex before it closed, when Marcus suddenly appeared, driving the original rocket car from Nathan's failed experiment. The vehicle was still functional despite its previous crash, and Marcus had somehow managed to restart its propulsion system for their emergency evacuation. There were smiles all around as Marcus apologized for his recent mistakes and poor judgment, his actions demonstrating that he had finally understood what really mattered in his life. They performed their special friendship handshake, a gesture that symbolized the restoration of their bond and their shared commitment to supporting each other. Tyler had to remind everyone about their urgent situation before they could spend too much time celebrating their reconciliation, the practical urgency of their departure taking precedence over emotional reunions. They quickly secured their safety belts and began racing through city traffic like their lives and their timeline depended on their speed. Marcus drove with reckless determination, weaving through traffic and ignoring safety regulations as they desperately tried to reach the park before their only chance of returning home disappeared forever. The rocket car's unconventional propulsion system made their journey both faster and more dangerous than normal vehicular travel. They crashed through minor obstacles and narrowly avoided serious collisions, their route to the park becoming an improvised demolition derby as Marcus prioritized speed over caution. Other drivers honked and swerved to avoid their erratic trajectory, but the Guardians were too focused on their mission to worry about traffic violations or property damage. Marcus drove so aggressively that they missed their intended turn, the rocket car's momentum carrying them past the correct street while they were traveling too fast to make the necessary adjustment. Without hesitation, Tyler produced his trusty grappling hook and attached it to a nearby street lamp, using the device's mechanical advantage to execute a screeching U-turn that brought them back on course. The maneuver was both dangerous and spectacular, with the rocket car's tires smoking as they fought for traction during the sharp turn. Marcus immediately accelerated again, as if stopping would mean certain death, his determination to reach the return vortex overriding all other considerations, including personal safety. The return vortex came into view just as it began shrinking rapidly, its edges contracting with each passing second as the temporal energies that sustained it began to dissipate. The window of opportunity was closing faster than they had anticipated, and it became clear that they would have only one chance to enter the portal before it disappeared entirely. Fortunately, the rocket car was fast enough and Marcus's driving was skilled enough to slip through the portal just before it closed completely, their escape from the past accomplished with seconds to spare. The sensation of temporal displacement was familiar but still overwhelming, reminding them of the incredible forces they were manipulating through their technology. 3 years in the future, the athletic field at Riverside High School was peaceful and normal, with only a few students jogging around the track as part of their regular exercise routine. The tranquility of the scene was completely at odds with the crisis and chaos that had preceded their temporal intervention. This peaceful atmosphere was shattered when a temporal vortex opened above the field and expelled the 3 Guardians like unwanted debris, their arrival marked by the destruction of the rocket car which had served them so well during their escape from the past. Only one wheel survived the temporal transition, landing nearby as a memento of their adventure. The school's football coach appeared moments later, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just returned from preventing global catastrophe and saving the entire world from destruction. He ordered them to join the other students who were jogging around the track, his concern limited to their apparent truancy from physical education. They naturally boycotted the coach's demand for participation in mandatory exercise and headed into the school building, where they encountered Vice Principal Henderson. Remarkably, Henderson showed no memory of the chaos and crisis that had consumed the school just hours earlier from their perspective, suggesting that their timeline alteration had been successful. At that moment, they realized that they had been returned to the very first day they had ever traveled through time, their intervention having reset their personal timeline to the beginning of their adventures. The realization was both satisfying and profound, confirming that they had successfully repaired the damage they had caused to the space-time continuum. Feeling vindicated by their success and confident in his understanding of what really mattered, Marcus approached Brandon and finally expressed his true feelings about their former friendship. He explained that he had learned to value loyalty and genuine affection over social status and superficial popularity. Marcus then took Jessica outside to the courtyard where they could talk privately, using time travel as a metaphor to confess his romantic feelings for her without revealing the literal truth about their recent adventures. His approach was both honest and creative, allowing him to express emotions that he had been hiding for years. Fortunately, Jessica revealed that she had felt the same way about him for a long time, her admission confirming that their mutual attraction had been genuine despite the social barriers that had kept them apart. Their romantic reunion was everything that Marcus had hoped for during his years of unrequited feelings. They were still enjoying this perfect moment of mutual confession and newly acknowledged love when Nathan rushed over with yet another scientific idea that he was eager to share. He announced that he wanted to attempt teleportation as their next experimental project, his mind already moving beyond time travel to other impossible technologies. Marcus and Tyler didn't want to hear anything about additional dangerous experiments, their recent experiences having taught them to be cautious about Nathan's ambitious scientific projects. They physically dragged Nathan away from Jessica's presence, their intervention both protective and comedic as they prevented him from disrupting the romantic reunion. Thus concluded the remarkable story of the Guardians of Riverside High School, three unlikely friends who had used impossible technology to save their world and learn important lessons about friendship, loyalty, and what really mattered in life. Marcus never would have befriended Nathan if he hadn't been betrayed and humiliated by his former friends, but that traumatic experience had led to the most important relationship of his life. Despite such a difficult beginning, both boys had gone on to achieve actual time travel with Tyler's crucial assistance, creating technology that surpassed the wildest dreams of professional scientists and government researchers. Together, they had faced incredible challenges and solved seemingly impossible problems, proving that with the right friends and unwavering determination, even the most extraordinary achievements were possible. Their adventures had taught them that true friendship was more valuable than social status, that loyalty was more important than popularity, and that the people who stood by you during difficult times were the ones who truly mattered. The Guardians had saved their world not just from destruction, but from the smaller cruelties and injustices that made high school life miserable for those who didn't fit into conventional social hierarchies. In the end, their greatest achievement wasn't the mastery of time travel or the prevention of global catastrophe, but the discovery that genuine friendship could overcome any obstacle and that standing up for others was always the right choice, regardless of the personal cost or social consequences.